Welcome to the Deep Dive. Get ready, because we are about to plunge into this fascinating stack of sources you've brought us. Today, we're diving deep, really deep, into the comprehensive lore and history of something truly remarkable, Warehouse 13.
Yeah, it's quite a collection you've got here.
It really is. Our mission, basically, is to unpack everything these materials reveal, the long, complex history, the kind of bizarre mechanics of how this place actually works,
Uh-huh.
the incredible, often flawed people who dedicated their lives to it, and of course, the seemingly endless wonders and, frankly, terrifying dangers held inside.
Right.
We've got excerpts from the TV series, notes covering novels, comics, even webisodes,
Yeah.
all pointing to the secret repository for powerful, often really perilous artifacts.
And what's fascinating looking through the source material you provided is how it doesn't just cover the stuff we might know from, say, the recent history.
Yeah.
It lays out this deep, evolving mythology. It becomes clear pretty quickly that this whole concept, this idea of a warehouse protecting important, powerful objects, it goes back much, much further than you might initially think.
Very further.
Exactly. These notes, they meticulously chronicle not just the big plot points, but the actual nature of the institution itself. Its governance,
Yeah.
this unique relationship between the place and its caretaker. Its, well, impossible architecture, and the people chosen to serve it. So the plan is, let's trace that history chronologically, starting right at the beginning, the very beginning.
Okay.
And then we can delve into the fascinating how and why of its often baffling operation.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the top then. You mentioned ancient origins. The sources make it super clear this wasn't just like a 20th century idea. This warehouse thing goes way back.
Oh, absolutely. The sources actually pinpoint the very beginning to the era of Alexander the Great.
Wow.
Yeah, we're talking between 336 and 323 BC. Warehouse 1 was established under his direct command.
Alexander the Great. Seriously. What would someone like him need a secret warehouse for? I mean, wasn't he busy conquering the world?
Well, think about it from his perspective.
Yeah.
He was conquering the world, right? Sweeping across vast territories, encountering all these different cultures, mythologies, technologies, and undoubtedly some powerful, maybe inexplicable objects along the way. The sources say the warehouse's initial purpose was actually pretty practical for an emperor like him,
Okay.
housing the huge number of powerful and often perilous artifacts he acquired during those extensive military campaigns. This fundamental need, right, to collect and contain items of extraordinary power
Yeah.
that set the core mission for everything that followed.
Wow. Okay, so it started as basically a conqueror's lockup for dangerous magical stuff. That's
Wow.
intense.
Pretty much. And the source material even draws a really interesting parallel. It mentions the Library of Alexandria.
Oh, yeah.
Cites it as an example, or maybe an analog. That library flourished under the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt right after Alexander. It was this massive repository trying to collect all human knowledge.
Right, I remember that.
Well, the ambition of the Ptolemies to gather knowledge kind of mirrors the warehouse's mandate to collect all significant, powerful objects. It suggests this ancient drive, maybe, to collect and preserve things of immense value, whether it's knowledge or, power-infused objects.
That's a fascinating connection. Knowledge versus power, both needing these huge secret repositories. So after Alexander died, what happened to Warehouse 1? It didn't just stay put, did it? His empire fractured.
No, it didn't stay put. And this is where the tradition that defined the warehouse for, well, millennia really began. The sources detail that after Alexander's death, Warehouse 1 was relocated
Where to?
to Egypt,
Yeah.
under the Ptolemaic kingdom. This move started the whole tradition of the warehouse following the dominant global power of the era.
Ah, the shifting sanctuaries idea. It chases the power wherever it pops up.
Exactly. Pragmatic. But it wasn't just a location shift. The organizational structure itself began to solidify right here in Egypt. The Ptolemaic rulers, the sources say, appointed a group known as the Regents.
The Regents. Okay, I've heard that name.
Right. They were appointed to oversee this new location, Warehouse 2. And crucially, the sources state they also acted as the initial agents or collectors for the warehouse.
So they weren't just administrators, they were out finding stuff too.
Apparently, yes. At
Yeah.
the start. This wasn't just, shuffling paperwork. This was the formal beginning of the organizational structure that would last for centuries. You've got the regents overseeing things, and then a dedicated force of agents responsible for artifact retrieval.
That makes a lot of sense. You need the muscle of the empire to secure it, keep it safe, and you need dedicated people, agents, to actually go out and find the stuff. So how many times did it move? The outline you mentioned listed quite a few.
Oh, yeah. The tradition of shifting continued consistently, tracking the ebb and flow of global power centers across the map. After Warehouse 2 in Egypt, which persisted even through the Roman conquest,
Hmm.
we see the lineage continue through 10 more locations before we get to the U.S.
10 more. Okay, run us through them quickly.
All right, so Warehouse 3 was in the Western Roman Empire, based in Italy. Then after Rome's decline, Warehouse 4 was established within the Hunnic Empire.
The Huns. Seriously, Attila the Hun had a warehouse.
Apparently so. It lasted until Attila's death. Quite a change of scenery from Rome,
You're
right?
not kidding. From Roman legions to Hunnic hordes. Talk about adapting.
Indeed. The torch then passed back west to the Byzantine Empire for Warehouse 5. After that, interestingly, the focus shifted east again. Warehouse 6 was in the Khmer Empire.
Cambodia. That's really unexpected. I wouldn't have guessed that.
It really highlights how the idea of the dominant empire wasn't always centered on Europe or the Mediterranean. The massive Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan hosted Warehouse 7.
Wow, Genghis Khan too. Alexander, Attila, Genghis Khan. They collected powerful rulers as well as artifacts.
It seems that way. Then it was back to Europe with the Holy Roman Empire in Germany for Warehouse 8. That spanned from around 1260 to 1517.
Okay.
Warehouse 9, this one's important, was located in the Ottoman Empire, specifically in Constantinople. It stayed there until the death of Suleiman the Magnificent.
Why is Warehouse 9 important? You mentioned that.
The sources make a point of noting its future significance. It becomes a key location later in the lore, specifically tied to a major conflict involving a character named Paracelsus.
Paracelsus. Okay, file that name away. So a former warehouse location, centuries old, still impacts the modern story. History doesn't stay buried here.
Definitely not. Moving further east, Warehouse 10 was situated within the Mughal Empire in India. Then Warehouse 11 found its home in the Russian Empire under the Romanov dynasty.
Russia.
And
Wow.
here, the sources give us a specific, really fascinating detail. The Napoleonic War of 1812, Napoleon's invasion of Russia. It was, according to these sources, partly an attempt by Napoleon himself to seize control of Warehouse 11.
Wait, Napoleon's invasion. That wasn't just about conquering Russia. It was partly an artifact grab.
That's what the sources claim, yeah.
Yeah.
A major factor. And it was during Warehouse 11's time, under the Romanovs, that the Regents apparently formalized the practice of employing dedicated agents solely for artifact work.
Ah, so it went from regents maybe doing double duty to a full-time agent corps.
Exactly. A specialized force. The source even mentions historical Russian military units, like the 11th Infantry Division, just to give some context for the kind of military power backing the empire at that time, which you'd obviously need to protect something like the warehouse.
Makes sense.
Finally, Warehouse 12 landed in the United Kingdom, Great Britain, from about 1830 to 1914. The agent practice really expanded globally during this peak of the British Empire.
Right, the empire where the sun never set. Perfect base for global artifact hunting.
Precisely. And the sources highlight a key figure from this era, Helena G. Wells.
H.G. Wells. Like the author.
Well, Helena G. Wells. The sources strongly imply she was related to, or perhaps the inspiration for, the famous author H.G. Wells. She served as an agent for Warehouse 12 and apparently contributed significantly with her inventions and knowledge.
Inventions. So she was like a Q figure for the warehouse.
Seems like it. And they even link this period to H.G. Wells's actual writings, things like The Land Ironclads, suggesting his fictional works might actually reflect the technological speculation and anxieties of that era, maybe even directly inspired by his relative secret work for Warehouse 12.
That is wild. So the real-world famous author might have been getting story ideas from his secret agent family member. My mind is kind of blown right now.
It's a fantastic piece of world building, isn't it? Adds a whole layer.
It really does. Okay, so putting all that together, this 2,000-year history of shifting locations, chasing empires, what's the big takeaway from that whole ancient era? What does it tell us?
Well, I think it shows a consistent, almost brutally pragmatic approach. The decision makers, maybe the early regents, they were prioritizing security and resources above everything else, tying the warehouse's fate to the world's current superpower, wherever that might be.
Makes sense. Safety in numbers or safety in empires, I guess.
Right. And it's a testament to the perceived danger and the value of these artifacts that their protection warranted this kind of globe-trotting strategy for millennia. And it absolutely underscores the long-standing nature of these artifact threats. This isn't a modern problem they stumbled into. They've been grappling with this kind of stuff since, well, before the Roman Empire even existed.
It really puts the whole Warehouse 13 we know into perspective, doesn't it? It's not the start of the story, it's just the latest chapter in this ancient ongoing battle. Which brings us finally to the modern era, the dawn of Warehouse 13 in South Dakota. That was a huge shift, moving it to the U.S.
It was a very significant shift, yeah. Not just location, but philosophy. Instead of setting up shop in the bustling, visible hearts of empires like London or Constantinople, the decision was made to place Warehouse 13 in a remote, deliberately concealed site in the United States. Secrecy over centrality.
And it wasn't exactly smooth sailing from the get-go either, was it? The sources mentioned the first attempt at a U.S. Warehouse 13.
That's right. Good point. The initial Warehouse 13 was actually built in the U.S. back in 1898. They deliberately chose that remote spot in South Dakota for secrecy and isolation, like we said, a total contrast to being in a major imperial capital.
Okay.
But this first attempt was incredibly short-lived. The sources tell us, flat out, it burned down. Completely destroyed.
Burned down a whole warehouse. How? And the sources explain why.
They do. The explicit reason given is they had an insufficient understanding of how to safely store the artifacts. They hadn't figured out the volatility, the incompatibility issues.
Yeah.
Placing certain artifacts near others apparently caused catastrophic reactions. Boom.
Wow. So they learned the hard way that just collecting the stuff wasn't enough. You had to understand the chemistry almost, the interactions between them.
Exactly. Just piling them up was asking for trouble. This fire was a critical, devastating lesson about the inherent dangers these objects posed and the absolute need for specialized knowledge and, well, containment protocols. Proper storage.
It sounds like a nightmare. And there's a personal connection here, too, from Mrs. Frederick.
Yes, a really poignant detail from the sources connects to this fire. Mrs. Frederick's sister. She was the caretaker, or at least a key figure, at this 1898 warehouse. And she died in the fire.
Oh, no.
Yeah. This tragedy, the sources say, is what directly led to Mrs. Frederick herself eventually taking on that monumental role of caretaker for the rebuilt Warehouse 13. It was personal for her.
So her dedication, her seriousness, it's rooted in that family loss, that early disaster. That adds a whole other layer to her character.
It absolutely does. So learning from that catastrophe, the current, much more robust Warehouse 13 was rebuilt and became operational in 1914. Interesting timing, right? Coinciding with the start of World War I.
Yeah, launching a secret warehouse during a world war. Bold move.
Maybe the best time to hide something big. Anyway, its design was this incredible collaboration of minds. It sounds almost like something out of, well, a steampunk novel.
Who is involved?
Get this. Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla.
Edison and Tesla working together. Didn't they hate each other?
Apparently, for the warehouse, they put differences aside. And M.C. Escher contributed to the architecture.
Escher. That explains the impossible staircases and weird geometry.
Doesn't it? And Albert Einstein designed unique expansion joints that theoretically allow for its infinite capacity.
Infinite capacity. Okay, that's handy when you're collecting potentially everything dangerous in the world. Edison, Tesla, Escher, and Einstein. What a design team. That explains so much about why the place looks and feels so impossible.
It really does. This blend of, incredible scientific innovation and totally unconventional, almost magical mechanics was absolutely vital for housing an ever-growing and inherently unpredictable collection safely, or, as safely as possible. The sources even hint at DVD featurettes covering this design process, mentioning steampunk influences,
Right.
which makes perfect sense given the 1914 timing and the kind of tech artifacts they'd be housing.
Right. Now, jumping forward significantly in time, the modern era we see in the show, it really hinges on certain people. The sources give us a really detailed backstory for one key figure who becomes absolutely central. Artie Nielsen. What did the sources tell us about his path to the warehouse?
Well, Artie, born Arthur Weisfeld, 1948 in Philadelphia. He had a surprising start. He was actually a gifted pianist. Really gifted, got into Juilliard.
A Juilliard pianist.
Yeah.
Artie. Wow. Okay, so how did he end up, Artie?
Life took a turn. He ended up joining the National Security Agency, the NSA, as a cryptographer.
Codebreaker.
From Juilliard to the NSA, that's quite a pivot.
Okay.
It is. And then came the defining moment. During the Cold War, he got accused of treason.
Treason. Artie.
Yeah. The sources explain he was trading artifacts, which, crucially, he thought at the time were just trinkets, minor items with no real power to the Soviets.
Why would he do that?
His motivation wasn't malice, it wasn't ideology, it was desperate. He was trying to free family members who were imprisoned in a Soviet gulag.
Oh, wow. Okay, so he thought he was trading harmless curios, But they were actually artifacts. That's a huge, potentially catastrophic mistake.
Absolutely catastrophic. The sources describe this kind of aha moment for him, when he finally realized the true power, the danger of these trinkets, the potential chaos he'd maybe unleashed. A completely guilt-ridden Artie turned himself in.
He confessed.
He did.
Yeah.
Which led to this pivotal intervention. November 18th, 1978. Mrs. Frederick stepped in.
Mrs. Frederick again. She seems to be everywhere important.
She plays a key role. She offered him a path to redemption, basically. Service to the warehouse. His charges were expunged, wiped clean. He was given a new identity. Arthur Nielsen, partly for his own protection, from Soviet fallout or artifact weirdness. And he was formally recruited into the U.S. Secret Service, specifically as a warehouse agent.
So he wasn't just pardoned and hired, he became a Secret Service agent as his cover story for the real job. That's some serious deep cover.
It really highlights the level of secrecy, doesn't it? The sources note he spent over 30 years there before the series even begins, eventually becoming the special agent in charge.
30 years. Wow.
Yeah, and it also details a critical early relationship he had, a close partnership with another agent, James McPherson.
McPherson. That name comes up later as a major antagonist.
Yeah. The relationship eventually soured badly because McPherson, according to the sources, was willing to use artifacts for his own personal gain. Specifically, he used the Phoenix artifact to save his wife's life. But the sources state that act came at a terrible cost, costing other people their lives. A classic artifact trade-off.
So McPherson crossed a line Artie wouldn't. Their falling out was fundamental to who Artie became.
Absolutely fundamental. This deep, difficult history with McPherson explains so much about the Artie we meet later, his vast knowledge, his intense caution, his tendency towards secrecy, and definitely his incredibly complex, often really tense relationship with McPherson when he reappears as an enemy. Artie learned firsthand the hard way about the cost of unchecked power and betrayal from within the system.
Okay. So this whole period, establishing the South Dakota Warehouse 13 in 1914, its crazy advanced unconventional design born from that Dream Team collaboration, and then recruiting key people like Artie after his own personal crisis. That really set the stage for the modern era we see unfold. The remote location, the lessons from the 1898 fire, it clearly pushed them towards a more cautious, almost scientific approach to managing artifacts.
Right. But as we know, even with all that, the unpredictable nature of the artifacts themselves would continue to challenge the warehouse and its agents constantly. No system is foolproof with this stuff.
Which brings us right up to 2009. That's the year the TV series kicks off. And when we, as listeners or viewers, really get introduced to this world properly, this is a pivotal moment, isn't it? New agents arrive, old threats resurface, new ones emerge. It's all about the rapid team formation, how their dynamics take shape, and just diving headfirst into the madness of artifacts.
Exactly, and the sources are quite specific about how that core team, Pete and Myka, came together.
Yeah, tell us about that. It wasn't exactly a standard recruitment drive, was it?
Not at all. It happened right in the pilot episode. There was this incident at a museum in D.C. involving two artifacts, the Aztec Bloodstone and Lucrezia Borgia's comb.
Borgia's comb. Sounds dangerous already.
It was. Apparently, it caused a museum worker to become possessed, acting out Borgia's jealousy and rage. Secret Service agents Pete Latimer and Myka Baring were assigned to the case. After resolving it, mostly thanks to Pete's weird vibes and Myka's quick thinking, they were abruptly reassigned by Mrs. Frederick.
Reassigned where?
To an immediate and open-ended assignment in the Badlands of South Dakota. Warehouse 13. They were essentially given this new, highly classified job under the supervision of Artie Nielsen, plucked from their normal lives and dropped into the deep end.
Pete and Myka, the classic pairing. But their initial dynamic was like oil and water, right? Total opposite.
Completely. The sources really describe their initial dynamic as a definite clash of styles, almost aggressively different. You had Pete, guided by his intuition, his vibes, not afraid to bend the rules, always ready with a joke.
Yeah.
And then Myka, meticulous, organized with that eidetic memory, strictly by the book, always needing a plan. They grated on each other initially.
So how did they start working together?
Their first official mission forced them to. They were sent to Iowa, investigating a lawyer who was channeling Lucrezia Borgia via that same comb artifact. It was their trial by fire, really. It forced them to confront the bizarre reality of these artifacts head-on and, more importantly, start figuring out how to function as a team despite their completely different approaches. Eventually, their contrasting styles actually became their strength. Pete's gut feelings complementing Myka's detailed preparation.
Yeah, they became a great team. And season one just threw artifact after artifact at them, didn't it? Really showcasing the variety of stuff the warehouse deals with.
Oh, absolutely. The sources highlight that season one was just packed with artifact encounters. It did a great job showing off that endless wonder Artie talks about, but maybe more often, the endless danger that the warehouse exists to contain.
Give us some examples from season one that the sources mention.
Sure. The notes list quite a few that really illustrate the range and the risk. You had Eric Marsden's record, not just music. It induced this soothing, almost catatonic state. Bank robbers were using it. Yeah. Then there was James Braid's chair, found in Colorado, which lowered inhibitions, made people spill all their secrets. The cloak of the Lenape people, used by a thief for invisibility. The spine of the Saracen. That thing attached itself to Pete, gave him enhanced physical abilities, but also made him dangerously aggressive.
Ouch.
Right. The Hanjo Masamune, a legendary samurai sword, rendered its user invisible and was specifically sought after by McPherson, Artie's old partner. Lewis Carroll's looking glass actually trapped Myka inside it, while this entity called Alice possessed her body out in the real world.
Whoa, like through the looking glass for real.
Pretty much. And Edgar Allan Poe's quill pen and notebook this was a bifurcated artifact, meaning its effect required both parts working together. It could manifest written descriptions into reality, and it even affected Myka's father at one point.
So artifacts aren't just static objects. They actively do things, often with really unpredictable and dangerous side effects. And sometimes they come in pieces you have to find both of.
Precisely. They're often problems embodied in objects, usually tied to intense human emotions or specific historical figures, which makes them incredibly volatile. The bifurcated ones add another layer of complexity to finding and neutralizing them, and the introduction of Lena, the B&B proprietor near the warehouse. Her ability to read auras, to sense artifact energy, that provided a crucial layer of support and esoteric knowledge for the team, especially Artie, in figuring out how to store things safely without them reacting to each other.
Yeah, Lena seemed really important behind the scenes, but season one wasn't just Pete and Myka finding stuff. It introduced another really pivotal character, didn't it? Claudia Donovan.
Yes, Claudia's introduction was pretty dramatic. The warehouse computer system, this incredibly complex, supposedly secure system, it got breached, hacked by this brilliant young techno-whiz, Claudia.
She hacked the warehouse as, like, a teenager.
Pretty much. The sources explain she wasn't doing it maliciously, though. She was actually seeking Artie's help. Her brother, Joshua, was trapped in some kind of interdimensional limbo because of an experiment gone wrong with an artifact called Redicus's compass.
Okay.
And Joshua had been working on this compass with someone Claudia only knew as Professor Reynolds, who turned out to be a pseudonym for James McPherson.
McPherson again. He's connected to everything bad, it seems.
He has his tendrils everywhere. Anyway, after they successfully rescued Joshua, Mrs. Frederick essentially presented Artie with an ultimatum. Either hire Claudia, recognizing her demonstrated knowledge of the warehouse's systems and her clear connection to artifacts, or, well, deal with her in some other, presumably less pleasant, warehouse way.
Yikes. So hire her or neutralize her.
That seemed to be the implication. Artie was really hesitant at first. He saw her as impulsive, maybe reckless. But Lena, with her aura-reading insight, apparently saw Claudia's potential and persuaded Artie. Claudia's arrival brought vital tech expertise, this youthful, sometimes chaotic energy that definitely clashed with Artie's cautious nature initially. But she quickly became an invaluable asset, almost his apprentice.
It makes sense. She was an outsider who suddenly knew way too much. Better to bring her inside the circle.
It was a pragmatic decision, definitely. Driven by the need for secrecy, but also recognizing her unique skills were actually useful.
Now, you mentioned McPherson earlier. In Artie's backstory, he doesn't just stay in the past. He becomes the big bad in the latter half of season one, right?
He does indeed. The back half of season one really ramps things up with the full emergence of James McPherson, Artie's former partner, now his full-blown nemesis. His actions forced Artie to confront everything about his past life. Arthur Weisfeld, the NSA, that treason arrest trading artifacts to free his family, how Mrs. Frederick recruited him and gave him the new identity. This wasn't just some random new villain. This was Artie's past literally coming back to haunt him and endanger everyone.
How did McPherson start causing trouble?
The sources reveal he was manipulating Lena.
Lena, but she's good.
She is, but she was being influenced by an artifact McPherson used on her. They didn't confirm which artifact until season 2 was called the Pearl of Wisdom, but he used her connection to the warehouse to steal artifacts. His plan was to auction them off to the highest bidder.
Selling artifacts, that's incredibly dangerous.
Hugely. And his actions led to a major internal crisis in the episode called Breakdown. Artifacts inside the warehouse started going haywire, interacting badly. A jammed neutralizer system trapped Pete, Myka, and Claudia inside a dangerous section. And at the same time, Artie got summoned before the Regents, including that guy Benedict Valda, to answer for his and McPherson's past actions. It showed the highest levels of authority were now directly involved in cleaning up this mess.
So McPherson's messing around wasn't just a field problem, it was causing chaos inside the warehouse itself and drawing the attention of the people who run the whole show, the Regents.
Exactly. The stakes got really high. The season climaxed in the episode titled McPherson. The team managed to stop the artifact auction he'd set up, but there were significant consequences. Claudia discovered her own unwitting connection to McPherson through her brother's past work with him. And worse, McPherson framed her using Harriet Tubman's thimble, making it look like she was a sleeper agent working for him.
Oh, poor Claudia. After everything she did to get her brother back.
Yeah, it was rough. They did manage to capture McPherson, and he was bronzed, which we learn is this process of flash freezing people, encasing them in a kind of suspended animation state.
Bronzing. Okay, that's a new containment method.
Seems reserved for the really dangerous people they can't otherwise neutralize. But even bronzed, McPherson wasn't done. Using Lena one last time, via that Pearl of Wisdom artifact's lingering influence, he managed to facilitate his own escape from the bronze sector. And the season ended on this massive cliffhanger, with Artie apparently caught right in the middle of a huge explosion in the umbilicus, the main entrance to the warehouse. Fade to black.
Wow, what an ending for season 1. Just chaos.
Total chaos. So what does this whole McPherson arc mean for the warehouse lore? He wasn't just a standard villain. He was this determined adversary with intimate inside knowledge of the warehouse, its protocols, its weaknesses. His actions caused these cascading crises that impacted multiple characters deeply. Artie's past, Lena's manipulation, Claudia's framing, and set up significant plot threads for future seasons. This whole arc really solidified that core team, forcing Pete, Myka, Artie, and Claudia to rely on each other under extreme pressure. And it introduced those complex backstories and recurring antagonists that would define so much of the series going forward.
Okay, so moving into 2010, season 2 picks up right after that explosive cliffhanger. And the sources say this season brought some seismic shifts, largely dominated by the return of Helena G. Wells, that figure from Warehouse 12 we talked about, deeply connected to the warehouse's past.
Right. The premiere immediately resolved Artie's fate. He survived the umbilicus explosion. But the sources are specific here. It was only because McPherson himself had secretly put the Phoenix artifact in Artie's pocket just before the blast.
McPherson saved Artie after everything. Why would he do that?
The sources don't give a definitive reason for McPherson's motive there. Maybe it was some twisted form of respect for their old partnership. Maybe he needed Artie alive for some future plan he had. We don't really know for sure. But regardless, there was a definite cost, a classic artifact consequence. The sources specify Mrs. Frederick's driver died in a fiery explosion that happened as a direct result of the Phoenix activating to save Artie.
Oh, man. Saved one life, cost another. That's harsh.
It's the nature of these powerful objects, it seems. Meanwhile, Lena, still under the lingering influence of that Pearl of Wisdom artifact McPherson had used on her, located and debronzed H.G. Wells.
H.G. Wells is back. The inventor agent from Warehouse 12.
Helena G. Wells, yes. Brilliant inventor, former agent, back from her bronze state. And she initially appeared to be helping McPherson, assisting him in breaching the Escher Vault, another high-security, geometrically baffling area of the warehouse.
So she was working with McPherson.
It looked that way at first. But then, in a major twist, Wells betrayed and killed McPherson once he'd served her purpose, which was getting her into that vault. She took an artifact from inside for herself.
Whoa, okay, so Wells is playing her own game. What happened to Lena after this?
Mrs. Frederick and the Regents intervened. They were able to free Lena from the Pearl of Wisdom's influence, removing the residual energy that had been subtly manipulating her and causing side effects like vertigo. Artie, however, started experiencing these unsettling visions of McPherson after his death, hinting at some kind of lingering psychological or maybe even spiritual impact from their intense history and McPherson's violent end.
So McPherson's gone, but his ghost, maybe literally, is still haunting Artie. And H.G. Wells is back, she killed McPherson, and she gets reinstated as an agent despite Artie obviously distrusting her intensely. That must have created huge tension within the team.
Oh, massive tension. The introduction or reintroduction of H.G. Wells was huge for the lore. She had this profound historical connection as a Warehouse 12 agent, this formidable intellect, and all these advanced inventions like the imperceptor vest for navigating dangerous environments and an anti-gravity generator.
Yeah.
It made her an incredibly powerful and totally unpredictable force now operating alongside the team.
An unpredictable genius inventor from the past. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, all this internal drama was unfolding. Something even bigger started happening externally. Warehouse 2, the one in Egypt. It reactivated.
Reactivated after thousands of years. How?
The sources don't initially explain how, just that it did. And this directly caused Mrs. Frederick to fall gravely ill. This is a crucial reveal in the mythology. That deep symbiotic connection exists between the caretaker and their specific active warehouse. Damage to the warehouse, or in this case another warehouse, unexpectedly coming online and maybe draining energy from the network, it directly imperils the caretaker's life force.
So, Mrs. Frederick's life is literally tied to the health and status of Warehouse 13. That's an incredible vulnerability.
It is, a huge one. And it immediately led to this desperate mission. Save Mrs. Frederick by neutralizing Warehouse 2. Pete, Myka, H.G. Wells, despite the distrust, and Regent Benedict Valda, remember him? The one Artie faced in Season 1. Turns out he was an expert on Warehouse 2, and they all went to Egypt.
A rescue mission led by an expert Regent and including the unpredictable Wells? Sounds dicey.
It was. The sources state that Regent Valda actually sacrificed himself during the mission to ensure its success, a noble end for him. But then came the devastating reveal.
What was it?
Wells had orchestrated everything. The reactivation of Warehouse 2, maybe even Valda's presence. It was all part of her plan. Her goal wasn't to help save Mrs. Frederick. It was to gain access to a specific artifact hidden within Warehouse 2, the Minoan Trident. And she wanted to trigger a new ice age.
A new icy age. Okay, that's a slight escalation from, stealing a comb.
Yeah.
H.G. Wells wanted to end the world.
Essentially, yes. Reset the world according to her own design, perhaps. It showed the terrifying scale of threat she represented. Myka and Artie managed to stop her, barely. But the revelation of her profound deception and her catastrophic potential had huge consequences for the team dynamic, especially for Myka, who had started to trust her, even vouch for her. This season also introduced Edwin Kozan as the head regent, giving us a clearer picture of the governing structure above Mrs. Frederick.
And that betrayal by Wells, the near global catastrophe she almost caused, that directly impacted Myka, didn't it? Leading to a really big decision at the end of Season 2.
It absolutely did. Myka was deeply shaken, trusting Wells, being complicit, even unknowingly, in a plan that nearly resulted in a global apocalypse. It hit her hard. The sources point out her decision in the Season 2 finale, reset. She resigned from Warehouse 13.
She quit after everything.
Yeah. Her fear, as the sources detail it, was that her judgment had been compromised. The emotional weight of the events, the betrayal, the potential consequences, it made her feel ineffective, maybe even a liability to the team and the mission. It really highlights the immense psychological pressure these agents are under. It's not just fighting bad guys with weird objects, it's the enormous toll the job itself takes on them personally.
Wow, okay. But Season 2 wasn't all world-ending threats and resignations. There were still plenty of those classic Artifact of the Week stories too, right? The sources list a bunch.
Oh, for sure. Season 2 still delivered plenty of those, as detailed in the source material. You had a vigilante using Charles Atlas's workout trunks to get temporary superpowers. Philo Farnsworth's 3D projector literally brought B-movie monsters to life right off the screen.
Huh. I bet Pete loved that one.
You can imagine. Man Ray's camera aged models rapidly with every flash. There was that fun crossover with the show Eureka.
Right, the other sci-fi show.
Yeah. Dr. Douglas Fargo from Eureka tried to upgrade the warehouse computer system, but accidentally unleashed this rogue AI called Hugo-1, which had been created years ago by a former warehouse agent, Hugo Miller. Tracking down Miller introduced his backstory and also his relationship with the Dr. Vanessa Calder, who becomes a significant love interest for Artie later on.
So the shows are definitely connected. That's a neat detail for fans of both.
It's a significant link in that shared universe, yeah. Elsewhere in the season, Pete's loyalty was tested during a mission involving his former Secret Service partner in Flame, Kate Logan. Claudia had her first official field assignment, dealing with a dangerous Human Torch situation, and that was also her initial challenging encounter with H.G. Wells before the big Ice Age reveal. Pete and Myka even switched bodies thanks to Robert Louis Stevenson's bookends, combined with Mata Hari's stockings in the episode Merge with Caution. Apparently, that was quite chaotic for both of them.
Body swapping. Classic trope, but probably terrifying with artifacts involved.
Probably. And H.G. Wells's time machine, which, interestingly, transports consciousness, not physical bodies, sent Pete and Myka back to Warehouse 13 in 1961 in the episode Where and When. That offered a really cool glimpse into the past operations, the look of the warehouse then, and the kinds of artifacts they dealt with in the Cold War era.
That sounds awesome, seeing the warehouse in a different time period. Now, the sources also mention some continuity quirks in Season 2, specifically with the Christmas episode.
They did, yeah. It's a good point to clarify for the timeline. The source material explains the chronological placement of the Christmas episode, Secret Santa, which was S2E13. Now, it aired as the Season 2 finale. But Myka is present and fully active as an agent in that episode, which directly contradicts her resignation in the episode right before it reset.
Right. How can she be there if she quit?
Exactly. The sources note that, in terms of the actual in-universe chronology, Secret Santa takes place earlier in Season 2. Specifically, it fits between Merge with Caution, S2E08, and Vendetta, S2E09. The reason it aired last was likely just scheduling. They wanted to air the holiday-themed episode during the actual holiday season, even if it broke the strict narrative flow of Myka's departure. So if you're trying to map out the timeline perfectly, you'd slot Secret Santa somewhere mid-season.
That's really helpful for anyone trying to watch or understand the story in strict order. And the sources you have also pull in details from the canonical novels and comics from this period too, expanding the world even more.
Yes, absolutely. They add a lot of depth to the lore around Season 2. There's the novel Warehouse 13, A Touch of Fever. The sources place it specifically in the latter half of Season 2 after Claudia joined the team, but before Myka left.
Okay, what happens in that?
It details Pete and Myka investigating this psychic healer who was actually using Claire Martin's gloves. Turns out one glove heals, but the other causes typhoid fever.
Oh, nasty. Bifurcated artifact again.
Exactly. Yeah. And Pete gets infected with typhoid, leading to this desperate race against time for a cure. Meanwhile, back at the warehouse, Artie, Claudia, and Lena are dealing with total internal chaos, including a vengeful totem pole coming to life. And get this, Artie actually having to fly the Red Baron's Fokker triplane, which is apparently stored in the warehouse.
Artie flying the Red Baron's plane inside the warehouse. That sounds amazing and terrifying.
Doesn't it? The novel also mentions Anne Bonny's cutlass, the Pirate Queen's sword, as a recently retrieved artifact. So this book really enriches the lore with more artifacts tied to American history and shows the team juggling multiple, simultaneous, chaotic crises, which feels very true to the show.
Definitely. What about the comics?
The Warehouse 13 Volume 1 comic series also fits in here, likely running concurrently with Season 2 events. It follows the team tracking down artifacts from a lost cache of Warehouse 12 stuff that had been missing for 150 years and suddenly resurfaced.
A whole cache from H.G. Wells's time.
Seems like it. The missions involved a ground-smashing artifact in Rio de Janeiro, some kind of person-enveloping fog artifact in Ireland, and a dangerous cutting sword in Japan. The main antagonist behind this global hunt for the lost cache was a new character named Viola Adair. So this comic series links directly back to H.G. Wells's era, expands the scope of historical threats still lingering, and introduces a whole new adversary connected to Warehouse 12's past.
Cool. More history coming back to bite them. And there were webisodes, too.
Yeah, the Monsters and Men webisodes. These were released between Season 2 and Season 3, and they were this mix of animation and live action. Pete, Artie, and Claudia get pulled into an artifact comic book called City of Ghouls.
Pulled into a comic book.
Yeah, they become these 2D figures navigating the fictional world within the comic panels. It's wonderfully whimsical, very meta, a really creative way to show an artifact interaction, where the object itself becomes the trap in the environment they have to escape.
Wow, okay, so even outside the main TV show, there's a lot more detail filling out the world, the kinds of threats they face daily, and these deep historical connections that keep popping up.
Exactly. So looking back at the impacts of 2010 and Season 2 as a whole, it's clear the past isn't just history in this world. It's an active and incredibly dangerous force, personified by figures like H.G. Wells and the lingering shadow of McPherson. Historical threats and unresolved issues kept resurfacing with very real, modern consequences. Wells, in particular, dramatically escalated the scale of dangers, moving from local incidents to potential global catastrophe with her Ice Age plan, and her actions directly contributed to Myka's temporary resignation, showing the personal cost. Furthermore, the reactivation of Warehouse 2 and its life-threatening impact on Mrs. Frederick established that deep, physical symbiotic link between the caretakers and the warehouse, a crucial vulnerability that hangs over everything moving forward.
Right. Okay, so heading into 2011, Season 3 arrives, and the sources describe the season as one of both upheaval and growth. It marked Myka's return, the addition of a new agent, the rise of a deeply personal and ultimately incredibly destructive adversary, all culminating in, well, total catastrophe by the end.
Yeah, Season 3 starts with addressing those team changes right away. Myka Baring did return, as the premiere title, The New Guy, ironically suggests. Her return restored that primary Pete-Myka field team dynamic after her absence.
But the title refers to someone else.
Yes. Simultaneously, Mrs. Frederick recruited a new agent, former ATF agent Steve Jenks, and the sources highlight his unique and incredibly valuable ability. He was essentially a human lie detector. He could physically, instinctively discern when someone was lying.
A human lie detector. That's got to be unbelievably useful for a warehouse agent dealing with tricky people and hidden motives.
Invaluable, right? Especially when dealing with artifacts and individuals that thrive on misdirection and deceit. Their first case together, Pete and Jenks, involved people dying in bizarrely Shakespearean ways, linked to an artifact version of Shakespeare's Folio. It immediately showcased the utility of Jenks's ability and the continued, well, weirdness of the cases they handle daily.
But the main villain of Season 3, the sources paint him as particularly personal, Walter Sykes.
Walter Sykes was definitely a formidable new antagonist, and his motivation was deeply personal. He had this intense vendetta against the Regents, the ruling body of the warehouse. Why? The sources explain Sykes used a wheelchair because the warehouse, years ago, had taken the Claudia bracelet from him.
Claudia, like Pinocchio.
Exactly. That bracelet was an artifact that had allowed him to walk. When they took it away, presumably because it was dangerous or unstable, they left him crippled. So he was consumed by this burning desire for revenge against the institution he blamed for his condition.
Wow. So the warehouse's past actions directly created this enemy.
Precisely. His method was cold and systematic, hunting down and murdering regents one by one using various artifacts he'd acquired. This threat really exposed the regents as vulnerable targets and led to another huge revelation.
What was that?
Pete Latimer's mother, Jane Latimer. She wasn't just some ordinary mom. She was revealed to be a regent herself.
Pete's mom is a regent he didn't know.
Not initially, no. It's a massive secret. She specialized in matters concerning children affected by artifacts. And, due to the threat from Sykes, she became the official guardian of Warehouse 13, specifically entrusted with the Ramadi Shackle, a powerful defensive artifact designed to protect the warehouse itself.
So Pete's mom is basically the warehouse's bodyguard now. This family is complicated.
Very. Pete even used the walking shoes artifact, which allows entry into memories to go into his mother's mind to investigate Sykes, uncovering Sykes' tragic backstory and confirming the warehouse's role in creating him. Sykes really represented a shift in antagonists. His motivation wasn't just greed or power. It was born directly from the warehouse's past interventions, forcing the show and the audience to grapple with the ethical complexities and potential negative consequences of artifact retrieval and containment. Sometimes trying to do the right thing has terrible unforeseen results. Season 3 also brought H.G. Wells back into the fray, tragically. The team found her living this quiet life, having faked her death after the Ice Age incident. She was living as Emily Lake, a high school teacher out in Wyoming, trying to be normal.
But Sykes found her.
He did. Seeking leverage or perhaps her specific skills, Sykes tracked her down. He used an artifact called the Janus coin on her. The sources say he used it to reconstruct her, which seems to imply it manipulated or restored her more dangerous persona, her memories, her ambition, effectively weaponizing her brilliance and knowledge against the warehouse once again.
He turned H.G. Wells back into a threat. That's awful, especially if she was trying to reform.
It seems he corrupted her, or at least brought her darker aspects, her historical persona, back to the surface using the artifact's power. And then, in a truly devastating turn of events, Steve Jenks, the new agent, had gone undercover within Sykes' organization to try and stop him.
Uh-oh.
Sykes found him out, and Steve was ruthlessly murdered by Sykes' main associate, Marcus Diamond, on Sykes' explicit orders.
No. They killed Jenks, the new guy.
They did. His death was a profound shock to the team, a devastating loss, especially for Claudia, who had formed a really close bond with him very quickly. It was brutal.
Man, that just raised the stakes immensely. Sykes wasn't playing around.
Not at all. He was deadly serious. And his whole plan culminated in the catastrophic season finale, the total destruction of Warehouse 13. He orchestrated this direct assault. The sources state he coerced the compromised H.G. Wells into helping him. And he used a powerful, custom-made bomb, the key component. Masonry salvaged from the House of Commons in London specifically. Masonry that had famously survived the Blitz during World War II, imbuing it with this immense symbolic and artifactual resilience.
He used part of history that survived one massive attack to destroy the ultimate repository of history. It's horribly poetic, dark irony.
It really is. The bomb, enhanced by that resilient artifact component, completely obliterated the South Dakota warehouse. Total destruction.
And Mrs. Frederick, because of the link.
Exactly. Due to her intrinsic symbiotic link to that specific warehouse, Mrs. Frederick perished as it was destroyed. The sources describe her aging rapidly to dust right before the surviving team members' eyes, a horrifying end to her long tenure. And in a final act, perhaps of redemption, H.G. Wells also sacrificed herself in the explosion, maybe trying to stop Sykes at the last second, or maybe trying to mitigate the damage she had helped cause. We don't know her final motive for sure. Amidst all this devastation, Artie revealed he had McPherson's old pocket watch, hinting at some kind of desperate, unknown backup plan related to his former partner.
The destruction of the warehouse, Mrs. Frederick turning to dust, Wells sacrificing herself, Jinx already dead. That must have felt completely insurmountable for the team left standing.
It was the series' biggest cliffhanger by far. It suggested an almost impossible loss, a fundamental threat to the entire system of artifact containment that had existed, in one form or another, for millennia. It completely shattered any illusion that the warehouse, this supposedly secure fortress, was invincible.
Season 3 wasn't just about Sykes and the destruction, though. The sources mention other artifact stories sprinkled throughout.
Correct. Season 3 still had plenty of those unique artifact investigations woven between the main arc, according to the sources. You had Typhoid Mary's knife, an artifact that could transfer illnesses and injuries just by touch.
Ew. Useful maybe, but mostly ew.
Definitely ew. Judah Lowe's amulet, which is connected to the Golem legend, was used in conjunction with a computer virus to turn people into clay statues. Hatshepsut's golden beehive artifact compelled obsessive devotion in anyone affected by it. It even impacted Pete's ex-wife Amanda during a case. Joshua's trumpet, the one from the Bible, capable of vaporizing objects with sound waves, was recovered with help from a hologram of H.G. Wells she'd apparently left behind.
Hologram of Wells, so she planned ahead even before Sykes got to her.
Seems like it, yeah. Always thinking. Douglas Fargo from Eureka made another appearance. This time he got himself trapped inside a bizarre Warehouse 13-inspired video game that involved Beatrix Potter's tea set and a Pink Floyd Prism artifact creating the game world.
Another Eureka crossover. They really leaned into that shared universe connection. It adds a nice layer.
They definitely did. And the sources also note the Christmas special from Season 3, titled The Greatest Gift. Chronologically, just like the Season 2 special, this episode sits before the devastating finale, despite its airing order.
Okay, what happened in this one?
Pete accidentally activated an artifact with Philip Van Doren Stern's upholstery brush, apparently which transported him to an alternate reality where he had never existed.
It's a Wonderful Life, Warehouse 13 style.
Basically. The sources detail this bleak alternate world. McPherson was in charge of the warehouse, Artie was imprisoned, and Myka and Claudia had never been recruited. Pete had to somehow convince this alternate broken team that he was real, that their reality was wrong, and rally them to find a way to restore his proper timeline. That's another powerful example of how artifacts can profoundly alter reality, and it reinforced Pete's importance to the team's existence.
That must have been a wild ride for Pete, seeing how things would be without him. A bit of an ego boost maybe, but scary too.
Probably both. So, summarizing Season 3's overall impact, Steve Jinx's shocking death showed a clear escalation in the brutality and effectiveness of their adversaries. Sykes, as a villain literally created by the warehouse's own past actions, forced the team and us to confront the uncomfortable ethical complexities and potential negative consequences of artifact intervention. And of course, the finale shattered the warehouse's perceived invincibility, leaving everything in ruins and setting up an incredibly desperate situation for the start of the next season, which leads us directly into 2012, 2013, and Season 4. This entire period, according to the sources, was defined by the massive, often devastating consequences of Artie's desperate act to save the day, using Magellan's astrolabe artifact to undo the warehouse's destruction. This single act unleashed a profound personal evil that nearly consumed him entirely.
Right, okay. So the warehouse was destroyed, Mrs. Frederick was gone, Wells was gone, everything was lost. What was Artie's desperate plan? How did McPherson's watch help?
Facing the literal ruins, mourning Mrs. Frederick and Wells, Artie used information hidden inside McPherson's old pocket watch, some final secret left by his former partner, to locate Ferdinand Magellan's astrolabe. This was an artifact rumored to have the power to turn back time.
Turn back time, like actually reset events.
That was the idea. The sources note that Artie was explicitly warned against using it by a figure named Brother Adrian, who belonged to a group called the Order of the Black Diamond, apparently an organization dedicated to monitoring artifact misuse. Adrian warned Artie it would unleash an undying evil of Artie's own making.
Ominous warning. Did Artie listen?
No. Desperate times. He used the astrolabe, rewinding time by exactly 24 hours, putting them back to just before Sykes launched his final attack.
And did it work? Was the warehouse saved?
It worked. In the new altered timeline, Warehouse 13 wasn't destroyed. The sources explain Sykes was unexpectedly pacified by Gandhi's Downy artifact right before the attack was meant to happen, then he died accidentally shortly after. So, disaster averted. Mrs. Frederick and H.G. Wells were alive again.
Amazing. So everything's back to normal.
Not quite. There was a terrible cost. Steve Jenks remained dead.
Why? The timeline reset.
Because his murder had happened before the 24-hour window of the reset.
Yeah.
The astrolabe only turned back the last day. Steve's death fell outside that window, so it wasn't undone. Artie saved the warehouse, but he couldn't save Steve. This immediately set up the core conflict of Season 4, dealing with Steve's death, the grief, and the nature of that forewarned evil the astrolabe was supposed to unleash.
Oh, man. Saved the world, saved his friends, but couldn't save Jenks. That's heartbreaking for the team, especially Claudia.
It was a heavy price, and Claudia took it particularly hard. Grief-stricken, she desperately searched the warehouse archives for a way to bring Steve back, and she found one. Johann Mausel's metronome, an artifact capable of resurrecting the dead.
A resurrection artifact? That sounds incredibly dangerous. Did she use it?
She did. She used it to bring Steve back to life. But, of course, there was a consequence.
Always a consequence with these things. What was it this time?
The sources detail that using the metronome forged this mystical link between Claudia and Steve. She began to feel everything he felt physically, his pain, any injuries he sustained, even things like tickles.
Whoa. They were physically linked. That's intense.
Incredibly intense. It added this profound new layer of depth and danger to their friendship, binding them together in this painful, intimate way. Eventually, Steve was able to sever the connection, but only through an act described as pure love. He saved his estranged mother's life by destroying the metronome itself, which simultaneously healed their family rift and freed both him and Claudia from the artifact's dangerous side effect.
So Claudia used a dangerous artifact out of love for her friend. It came with its own painful cost, but ultimately Steve's love for his family resolved it. It really highlights the risks even well-intentioned artifact use carries, doesn't it?
Exactly. Good intentions don't negate artifact consequences. Ever. Meanwhile, that evil Artie was warned about. It started to manifest. It took the form of a psychotic break within Artie himself, creating this dark alter ego that he perceived and sometimes interacted with as Brother Adrian, the figure who had warned him.
So the evil wasn't external, it was inside Artie.
Exactly. This Brother Adrian persona began manipulating Artie from within, compelling him to steal various artifacts from the warehouse's own shelves and use them to endanger his loved ones and potentially the world. The sources list examples like Thomas Jeffrey's boomerang, which always returned to its user no matter how far or dangerous the path, Mehmed II's silken cord, historically used for Ottoman assassinations, and Ignacy Hreniewicki's tattoo box, which could bring tattoos to life, often violently.
Artie was stealing artifacts and attacking his own team. That's terrifying.
It was. And it led to another tragedy. Lena, bless her heart, noticed Artie's increasingly erratic and dangerous behavior. She recognized something was deeply wrong and tried to intervene to help him, but she was tragically killed by Artie while he was under the influence of his Adrian persona.
Oh no, not Lena too. After everything she did for them, the B&B, the auras, Artie killed her.
Not the real Artie, but the evil influencing him. It was a devastating blow to the team, losing their anchor, their confidant. And it was a stark illustration of the astrolabe's corrupting, destructive power. It showed just how far Artie had fallen. The team, eventually aided by the real Brother Adrian, who they discovered trapped within a painting by yet another artifact, finally pieced it together and realized Artie himself was the source of all the attacks and the growing chaos.
So they had to fight Artie, or the evil inside. And this internal evil wasn't just hurting the team, was it? It threatened the whole world?
Yes. Artie's dark persona escalated things globally. It used the Chinese orchid artifact to unleash the deadly English sweating sickness, a historical plague, across the entire planet. It was a race against time as this pandemic spread like wildfire.
A global pandemic unleashed by Artie. How did they stop him?
In a desperate, heartbreaking confrontation, Claudia was forced to do the unthinkable. To stop him and break the evil's hold, the sources detail she had to stab Artie with Francesco Borgia's dagger. This act tragically fulfilled a specific nightmare vision Artie himself had experienced right after using the astrolabe, showing the prophecy coming true.
Claudia had to stab Artie, her mentor.
She did. It neutralized the Adriana persona and stopped the plague spread, but the act itself, combined with the dagger's properties, left Artie in a deep coma, near death.
Oh my God, this season is just relentless tragedy.
It really tested them to their absolute limits. The team, now aided by the real brother Adrian and some new, unexpected allies the centuries-old, supposedly immortal Count of Saint Germain and his mysterious wife Charlotte Dupree, raced to find the Count's ring. This was apparently the only artifact capable of reviving the dormant Chinese orchid artifact, which they needed to do to create an antidote and stop the pandemic completely. In a final, desperate effort to save Artie himself, Jane Latimer, Pete's regent mother, used Sigmund Freud's desk clock artifact to send Claudia and Steve into Artie's subconscious mind to try and pull him back from the brink of death and madness.
Into Artie's mind. Wow, okay. Season 4 sounds like just nonstop personal and global crises, one after another.
It truly was. And amidst all this apocalyptic chaos, Myka received her own devastating personal blow, an ovarian cancer diagnosis.
Oh, wow. On top of everything else.
Yeah. It brought this very real, very human struggle into the fantastical world artifacts, grounding the show in a relatable, painful reality that wasn't caused by some magical object, just life.
And if that wasn't enough, a new major antagonist emerged towards the very end of the season, connected to those new immortal allies.
Yes, a new threat with ancient ties appeared, setting up the next conflict. A young man named Nick was manipulated by Charlotte Dupree, who, it turned out, was not just alive, but secretly working with the Count of Saint Germain, playing a long game. She tricked Claudia into using the Warehouse 13 bronzer device to debronze Paracelsus.
Paracelsus, the guy from Warehouse 9, the one you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. The former caretaker of Warehouse 9 during the Ottoman Empire era, the alchemist who created the Philosopher's Stone, the one who sought true immortality. He'd been bronzed for centuries, deemed too dangerous. And in the chaotic process of releasing him, Claudia herself got accidentally bronzed, trapped in that state temporarily.
She freed Paracelsus and got trapped herself. This poor woman cannot catch a break. Seriously. Paracelsus, now free, immediately set his ancient plans back in motion and successfully used the Philosopher's Stone to finally achieve true immortality. Meanwhile, Myka made the difficult decision to undergo surgery for her cancer, facing her own very different kind of life-or-death battle. A critical piece of warehouse lore was also revealed here. Artie was forced to admit to Claudia that he knew, or at least strongly suspected, that she was destined to become the next caretaker of the warehouse. Claudia, the next caretaker. Wow, that's huge.
It is, and it became immediately relevant because the warehouse itself started destabilizing. Why? Because Claudia was bronzed, interrupting her potential connection, and Mrs. Frederick's own link was weakening due to the immense strain of the recent events and maybe just age. So Claudia, once she was debronzed, made this momentous and incredibly selfless decision. To save Warehouse 13 from collapsing entirely, she initiated a complex, dangerous process to sever Mrs. Frederick's symbiotic connection to it.
She cut Mrs. Frederick off from the warehouse to save the build.
Exactly. It ended Mrs. Frederick's incredibly long and dedicated tenure as caretaker. But it preserved the institution itself. It was a fundamental shift in the leadership structure, essentially forcing Mrs. Frederick into retirement, but paving the way for Claudia's future role and showing Claudia's immense growth, her understanding of the warehouse's needs above personal feelings. Wow. Severing that ancient link, that must have been a massive sacrifice for both of them in different ways. Huge implications. The sources also note the Grand Designs webisode series, which aired during Season 4. Chronologically, it gets placed before Lena's death, creating that minor timeline inconsistency we discussed earlier.
Right, the cardboard cutout episode.
That's the one. The premise is that the warehouse itself gets turned into this intricate steampunk diorama, and the team members become 2D cardboard figures within it. They had to figure out how to restore themselves and the warehouse back to normal. There was another fun, whimsical example showcasing the reality-bending power some artifacts possess, capable of affecting the entire environment and its inhabitants in bizarre, non-threatening ways for a change.
A bit of light relief before, well, everything else had happened.
Exactly. So, summarizing Season 4's sprawling, often dark themes, Artie's use of the astrolabe serves as this stark, brutal reminder that artifacts should not be used to alter major events or for personal gain, no matter how good the intention seems. Artie's breakdown, Lena's tragic death. These were direct, devastating consequences. Claudia's journey with the metronome, while dangerous, highlighted her fierce loyalty and her willingness to take extreme risks for those she loves, showing her growth, but also her increasing understanding of artifact consequences. And Paracelsus, this corrupted former caretaker, introduced the chilling idea that those most trusted with the warehouse's secrets, those who served it for centuries, could become its greatest enemies, maybe hinting at a dark potential inherent in prolonged exposure or a fundamental flaw in the caretaker selection process over history.
Okay. And that brings us to the final season. Season 5 in 2014. Shorter season, right? But it sounds like it was packed with wrapping things up. Confronting the now immortal Paracelsus, dealing with a shocking attempt to relocate the warehouse itself, reflecting on the team's legacy, and solidifying those character bonds as the institution prepared for yet another major transition.
Exactly. Having achieved immortality at the end of Season 4, Paracelsus didn't waste time. He seized control of Warehouse 13 in the final season premiere, his ultimate goal, something terrifyingly ambitious, to merge his consciousness with the warehouse itself, gaining total permanent control over all its artifacts and power, essentially to remake the world according to his own ancient alchemical design.
Merge with the warehouse, become the building. Is that even possible?
The sources imply that his mastery of the Philosopher's Stone, combined with his unique history as a former caretaker, gave him a deep, dangerous understanding of the warehouse's nature, making it a terrifying possibility. He wasn't just controlling it, he wanted to become it.
So how did they stop an immortal guy trying to become a semi-sentient, infinitely large building full of dangerous objects?
Time travel. To stop him, Pete and Myka, using some artifact-assisted time travel method, journeyed back to 1541 AD.
Why 1541?
That was the era of Warehouse 9, located in the Ottoman Empire. The warehouse that Paracelsus himself had been the caretaker of centuries ago, before he was bronzed.
Go back and fix the problem at the source.
Precisely. Their mission was to stop Paracelsus, in his past caretaker form, from killing the Regents of Warehouse 9 back then. Apparently, succeeding in that act in the past would have somehow cemented his mastery over the entire warehouse network across time, making him truly unstoppable in their presence.
Wow, okay. Time travel plots can get complicated. Did they get help?
They did. From Lisa da Vinci, who was apparently a Warehouse 9 agent in that era.
Lisa da Vinci. Any relation?
Implied ancestor of Leonardo, yes. With her help, they successfully intervened in 1541, stopped Paracelsus from killing the W9 regents, and crucially, managed to sever his connection to the entire warehouse network across time. This action ripple affected forward, making him mortal again in their present day, which allowed the team to finally defeat him for good.
That's brilliant, using the warehouse's own history against its corrupted former caretaker. What a deep cut into the lore.
It resolved a major threat, and it also offered us this rare, fascinating glimpse into how a historical warehouse actually operated, the kinds of agents it had centuries ago. Really cool world building.
Definitely. But Paracelsus wasn't the only threat in the final season. The sources mentioned someone trying to move Warehouse 13.
Yes, a really bold move. An alternate timeline version of Regent Benedict Valda resurfaced. Remember him, expert on Warehouse 2, sacrificed himself.
Yeah, but he died. How did an alternate version survive?
Apparently, he survived being erased from the timeline during Paracelsus's reality alterations in Season 4 because he happened to be holding an artifact tuning fork that Pete had accidentally dropped from his bag during the time jump. Pure luck, or artifact intervention, saved him when his timeline should have vanished.
Okay, that's convoluted, but all right. Alternate Valda is back. What was his plan?
Incredibly ambitious. He wanted to forcibly relocate Warehouse 13 from South Dakota to China, intending it to become Warehouse 14 under the name Kankushizi, which apparently means 14th warehouse.
He wanted to force the next step in the tradition and make China the new host country. Why?
His motives seemed tied to a belief that the U.S. was no longer the correct power base, that China was the future. And he used a truly cruel method to try and achieve it. The sources reveal he used Claudia's sister, Claire Donovan, as a kind of puppet caretaker.
Claire, the sister who was in the coma.
Yes. Claudia had managed to revive her earlier in Season 5 using a risky combination of artifacts. But this left Claire vulnerable, with a latent connection to artifact energy. Valda exploited this, manipulating her, trying to force her connection onto the warehouse to initiate the move.
He was weaponizing Claudia's love for her sister and Claire's own trauma from artifact exposure. That's just cold.
It highlights how adversaries often exploit the agent's personal connections and vulnerabilities. Thankfully, the team thwarted Valda's plan. In the final confrontation, Claire's artifact-induced telekinetic rage, the same power that had put her in the coma initially, was somehow transferred via another artifact to Valda. Stripped of his protective tuning fork artifact, the conflicting energies apparently caused alternate Valda to be erased from existence, finally gone for good, and Claire was cured in the process.
Wow, okay. Intense. And the sources mention the storyline brings up Mrs. Frederick's history again.
Yes. It reiterates her backstory, how she became caretaker, only after her own sister died in that 1898 warehouse fire. It served as a stark reminder of the immense, often deadly dangers involved in moving a warehouse, and maybe hinted at the unique, complex connection siblings can sometimes have to the caretaker process or the warehouse itself.
It seems like moving a warehouse is one of the most dangerous things you can attempt in this universe.
Absolutely. It's not just packing boxes, it's messing with fundamental forces.
So the shorter final season still managed to squeeze in some classic artifact adventures, too.
It did, yeah. The sources mentioned a few. Pete, Myka, and Artie helped Pete's ex, Kelly Hernandez, when her grandmother got trapped inside a Spanish telenovela playing on TV thanks to an enchanted brooch.
Trapped in a soap opera. Okay, that's a new one.
Right. Pete and Myka investigated some strange drownings happening on dry land, which turned out to be connected to Secret Service agents harboring dangerous secrets. Pete and Steve dealt with a dangerous artifact causing chaos at a Renaissance fair, always a good setting for artifact trouble. And Claudia, before Valda got involved, used Mother Shipton's prophecy cards combined with Alessandro Volta's Pale in that risky artifact combo attempt to revive her sister Claire from her coma.
Combining artifacts? You mentioned that sounds incredibly dangerous. Did they explore that more?
They touched on it. It's generally shown as a last resort, highly unstable, but Claudia, with her growing intuitive understanding of the warehouse's energy, her desperation to save her sister, and maybe her budding caretaker abilities, was willing to take the risk. It showed her growth, her commitment, and maybe foreshadowed her unique approach to artifacts.
Okay, so the series finale. It brought things to a close with a sense of transition, looking forward and focusing on legacy, didn't it?
It absolutely did. Mrs. Frederick, now free from the caretaker bond but still connected to the institution, made the official announcement. Warehouse 13 was destined to eventually move on from South Dakota to find a new host country in the future. The tradition would continue, the American era would end, but the warehouse would endure.
The end of an era, but not the end of the story.
Exactly. And there was this really poignant moment where the core team, Pete, Myka, Artie, Claudia, and Steve, gathered around King Arthur's Round Table, which turns out to be an artifact itself.
The actual round table, what does it do?
It allowed them to share and psychically record their most defining moments, their strongest memories and emotions from their time as agents. The sources specify these memories, these feelings, became integrated into the warehouse's own eternal emotions, effectively becoming part of the living lore, the very fabric of the building itself, adding to its unique, quasi-sentient nature.
So the warehouse doesn't just store objects, it stores the experiences of the people who serve it.
Wow. Seems so. A living archive. Emotionally, the finale also provided closure for Pete and Myka, who finally acknowledged and declared their love for each other after years of will they, won't they.
Finally. Took them long enough. That must have been an emotional scene, the whole team sharing their defining moments around the round table.
Yeah, a real moment of closure, reflection, and cementing their legacy within the warehouse itself. And the series didn't just end there. It concluded with a flash forward, decades into the future.
Oh, what did we see?
We see Claudia Donovan. She's now the new, experienced, long-serving caretaker presiding over the warehouse in its new location in a new, unspecified host country. She's shown viewing these holographic recordings of her friends' defining moments. Pete's, Myka's, Artie's, Steve's ensuring their legacies, their stories, were preserved and remembered within the warehouse's living memory.
So it confirmed Claudia's destiny. She really did become the caretaker. That provides a great sense of continuity.
It really did. It showed the institution would endure under her capable, if maybe slightly unconventional, hands.
Okay, so summing up the final season's themes then, it was clearly about tying up the major character arcs and reinforcing that idea of legacy. Paracelsus's defeat, achieved by going back to a past warehouse, emphasized history's cyclical nature and the long reach of past actions. Claudia's completed journey, from that outsider hacker kid to the destined caretaker, really embodied the theme of continuity, the passing of the torch. Her deep connection to artifacts, her fierce loyalty, her willingness to make those incredibly difficult sacrifices, It showed why she was the natural fit for the role.
Right. And the sources really drive home this idea of the warehouse as more than just a building. It's this quasi-sentient entity absorbing memories and emotions, becoming a living archive, almost a character in itself. This elevates the stakes. Protecting it isn't just about stopping bad guys. It's about preserving history, memory, maybe even consciousness on multiple existential levels. The core message seems to be that while the agents, the caretakers, the locations might change over the millennia, the warehouse's spirit, its purpose safeguarding that endless wonder and containing the endless danger is itself truly endless.
That's a powerful idea. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive into the lore, the source material does take a moment, like you said, to address something common in these big, long-running fictional stories. Those occasional moments of conflicting information or maybe adjustments to the established canon, sometimes called retcons.
Yes, exactly. Like pretty much any detailed fictional universe that evolves over multiple seasons and potentially across different media like novels and comics. The Warehouse 13 lore had moments that were expanded upon, clarified later, or sometimes presented in ways that could, if you look really closely, be seen as minor discrepancies or adjustments to the previously established timeline or facts. The sources address these points directly, which is helpful.
So what's the general explanation for these?
Well, the source specifically discusses how the warehouse's deep history developed over time. Early episodes, understandably, focus more on the current Warehouse 13, the main characters, and Artie's more recent past. That incredibly detailed history, the 12 predecessors, their specific locations like Egypt or the Khmer Empire, the exact role of the Regents versus the caretakers, that wasn't all fully formed right from episode 1. The sources mention that the showrunner, Jack Kenny, actually developed a lot of this detailed backstory during the run of season 1, realizing that the audience and the writers would naturally start asking, well, what came before Warehouse 13?
So they built out the ancient history as the show went along, fleshing out the world.
Precisely. It's a creative process. It meant that earlier, maybe vaguer ideas about the warehouse's past were later solidified, expanded upon, maybe slightly tweaked as the series progressed, and its mythology needed to support more complex stories. The exact number and nature of past warehouses, or the full scope of the Regent's authority versus the caretakers, these things became more defined over time. It's a pretty natural part of world building over multiple seasons. You ask questions about the present, and that forces you to invent the past, and sometimes that invention requires a little refinement of what came before.
Makes sense. Did the sources point out any specific inconsistencies fans might notice, besides the Christmas episode timings?
Yes, they highlighted that one involving Lena again in the Grand Designs webisode series from season 4. As we discussed, Lena is depicted as a cardboard figure in this webisode, which contextually belongs to season 4, often included in S4 DVD extras. However, Lena tragically dies midway through season 4 in episode 9, so seeing her, even as cardboard in the season 4 webisode, feels chronologically off.
Right, so how do the sources explain that one?
They note it creates that minor chronological inconsistency for viewers paying close attention. The likely explanation offered is either that the events of Grand Designs are meant to happen chronologically before her death within the main S4 timeline, maybe early S4, or simply that the webisode, being more whimsical and having a different production style, part animation, maybe just has looser continuity with the main series plot points. The sources also suggest the webisode's production likely predated the final writing and filming of her death scene in the main series, which often happens.
And the other one was the Secret Santa episode placement in season 2.
Exactly. S2E13 aired as a season 2 finale. But Myka is fully present and active as an agent, directly contradicting her resignation in the episode right before it reset S2E12.
Because she quit and then suddenly she's back for the Christmas adventure.
Right, if you just watch the airing order. But the sources again clarify that canonically, Secret Santa takes place earlier in season 2's internal timeline. Specifically after Merge with Caution, S2E08, but before Vendetta, S2E09, back when Myka was still fully on board. The airing order was almost certainly dictated by wanting to broadcast the holiday episode during the actual holidays, sacrificing strict narrative flow for seasonal relevance.
Yeah.
So for timeline purists, you just mentally slide it back into the middle of the season.
Okay, so these aren't necessarily plot holes or errors, just sometimes the practical realities of how TV shows are made and scheduled, impacting the strict chronological flow for the viewer.
Exactly. The sources present these points not as major flaws, but as reflections of the organic and sometimes pragmatic nature of television production and ongoing world building, refining initial concepts, scheduling needs influencing episode order. These are common factors in any long-running series. The sources conclude that while noting these minor points is important for a completely exhaustive record, they don't fundamentally undermine the overall coherence or the enjoyment of the rich lore they build. If anything, the willingness to expand the history later on, like Jack Kenny developing the past warehouses, shows a real commitment to deepening the world. Minor issues like these are often easily reconciled by fans or just accepted as occupying a slightly flexible space within the established canon. So, pulling it all together, that extensive chronicle you brought us, drawn from all those sources, the show, the novels, comics, webisodes, it paints this incredibly rich and expansive picture of Warehouse 13's universe.
It really does.
From its truly ancient origins way back under Alexander the Great, through the rise and fall of countless empires, its turbulent beginnings here in the United States, its modern-day operations under Artie, Pete, Myka, Claudia, and Steve in South Dakota, and even that glimpse into its future stewardship under Claudia Donovan. The warehouse has endured for millennia as this clandestine guardian against incredibly dangerous objects.
A constant battle, just shifting locations.
Right. And the narrative shows this fascinating evolution within the institution itself. Its strategic location always shifting with global power, the gradual development of the Regents for governance, and that unique, powerful, and often perilous symbiotic bond between the caretaker and the building. The internal mechanics, too, that blend of impossible architecture by Escher, advanced tech from Edison and Tesla, specialized equipment like Tesla's and Farnsworth's, and crucial containment protocols like neutralization, dew, and bronzing, they constantly underscore the immense, often overwhelming, challenge of trying to safeguard millennia of accumulated power and chaos.
But really, when you boil it all down, central to this whole saga, as detailed so well in the sources you gathered, are the agents themselves. The formation and the growth of that core team, Pete, Myka, Artie, Claudia, and Steve, seeing them navigate shared adversity, heartbreaking loss, and moments of triumph. That's the emotional bedrock of the whole story. Their missions constantly highlight the sheer unpredictability of the artifacts and the profound, sometimes utterly devastating impact they have on individuals and on history itself. And those complex figures like Wells, McPherson, Sykes, Paracelsus, they provided formidable challenges, often showing that the threats could come not just from external villains seeking power, but from the warehouse's own complicated past actions or even from within its most trusted ranks.
Absolutely. And certain key themes really resonate throughout the entire timeline presented in these sources. The powerful idea that the past is never truly dormant, that history can resurface with significant, often dangerous consequences, sometimes centuries or even millennia later. The corrupting influence of power, even when initially intended for good, dramatically illustrated by Artie's terrifying experience with the astrolabe, and the enduring importance of legacy, connection, and memory, with the warehouse itself becoming this living repository of its agents' experiences, their emotions, their defining moments. And of course, Claudia's journey, from that cynical outsider hacker to the destined caretaker, really embodies this theme of continuity, the necessary passing of the torch, showing that the warehouse will always need dedicated, passionate people willing to make incredible sacrifices for the greater good. And while, yes, some minor inconsistencies might exist if you scrutinize every detail across every platform, which is common in these big, expanding fictional universes, the source material presents the overall narrative as remarkably cohesive and deeply compelling. It's an exploration of a world where history's forgotten objects, imbued with intense human emotion and power, truly hold the potential to shape or break the present and the future. This chronicle you've assembled serves as a fantastic, detailed reference for the significant events, the key character arcs, and the fascinating world-building elements that constitute the endless wonder and the endless responsibility of Warehouse 13.
So we've just spent this time delving deep into this incredible history, this intricate lore with you, tracing the millennia-long journey of this impossible building and the dedicated, often damaged people who protect it. Here's something to think about based on what we just discussed. If the warehouse's very structure and the caretaker's own being are so intrinsically intertwined, if the building itself literally absorbs the emotions, the experiences, the defining memories of the agents, and maybe even echoes of the artifacts themselves over thousands of years, what does that really say about the nature of memory itself, about history, about consciousness? Especially when you're dealing day in and day out with objects that are saturated with such intense human energy from their creators or users, it suggests the warehouse is so much more than just a storage facility, doesn't it? Definitely something to mull over. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope we helped you gain some fascinating new insights into the incredible, complex world of Warehouse 13 from the sources you brought.
Yeah, we hope we helped you unpack all that material today. It was quite a journey.
Join us next time for another deep dive into the information you bring us.